important assignments, like our ambassador in Beijing and in Washington, and as India's foreign secretary. He's a thinker, and he's a great advocate of India's unique place in global community. He's a candid writer and a very bold speaker who doesn't mince his words. Friends, Dr. Jaishankar has been navigating our foreign policy with a doctrine which he calls as strategic autonomy. And according to him, there are three elements which define a sound foreign policy of a country. And they are designing strategic goals, recognizing optional outcomes, and appreciating the interplay of politics and policy. I think the same principle applies largely to public governance. We should not continue to benchmark ourselves with our past, and we should continuously explore new pathways for better governance. There's much about governance that we know, and there's much that we do not know. Sardar Patel, as Mahesh just said, he defined governance for an emerging nation, and he visualized the future of governance of the country. In the Constituent Assembly, once he said that one could rely upon future leaders of the country to develop healthy conventions. I think our experience of the last 7 decades has been quite different. I think we are still waiting for a mature governance ecosystem fit for the largest democracy of the world. In the beginning of the 21st century, Francis Fukuyama identified 2 main dimensions of state building: scope and strength. Scope means the range of subjects, the responsibility for which is taken by the state. And strength means the capacity of the state to discharge that responsibility. Francis Fukuyama said that the essence of stateness is enforcement. And what is enforcement? Enforcement, in the ultimate analysis, is the ability of the state to send a man in uniform with a gun to force people to adhere to the laws. Like many other countries, India has also invested in expanding the scope of the state. But unfortunately, and I'm saying this with 40 years experience in governance, that we have not invested adequately in the capacity of the state to enforce the laws and rules. In his Independence Day address, only a couple of weeks ago, our Prime Minister said that his government has an unwavering commitment to governance reforms. He said that in the last 1 decade, the governance has shifted to a new gear. While earlier, the citizen used to plead for what was rightfully his, and now he gets it on his doorstep. So friends, in the Aichi Center for Governance, we are looking forward to unfolding next generation of reforms. And ladies and gentlemen, we also have the good fortune today of the presence of Dr. Harivanshji, the Deputy Chairman of the Rajya Sabha. He, like Dr. Jaishankar, he needs no introduction. He has been conducting the proceedings of the House, and we see it on the TV, in a very exemplary manner, right since you took over. He is a renowned journalist who has worked with several media houses during his long career. He was also the media advisor to then Prime Minister Chandrasekhar ji, with whom he enjoys a very good relationship. During his student days, he came under the influence of Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan, and he joined the JP movement in 1974, if I'm right. Until today, he shares JP's philosophy and ideology. Personally, I have learned so much from Dr. Harivansh during my very frequent interactions with him when I was in Jharkhand. तो इन्हीं शब्दों के साथ मैं अपनी बात समाप्त करता हूं। आप लोगों का स्वागत करता हूं इस समारोह में और हरिवंश जी से उनके अध्यक्षीय भाषण देने के लिए निवेदन करता हूं। धन्यवाद।
नमस्कार। देश के विदेश मंत्री आदरणीय श्री जयशंकर जी, आदरणीय प्रभात कुमार जी, पूर्व गवर्नर और कैबिनेट सचिव, श्री महेश कपूर जी, वाइस प्रेसिडेंट आईसी सेंटर ऑफ गवर्नेंस, शांति नारायण जी और आप उपस्थित सभी विशिष्ट अतिथिगण, लौह पुरुष सरदार पटेल के सम्मान में आईसी सेंटर फॉर गवर्नेंस द्वारा इस साल आयोजित इस विशिष्ट लेक्चर में आने का मौका हम सब के लिए यादगार अनुभव रहेगा। इसके लिए डॉक्टर प्रभात कुमार जी व आईसी सेंटर फॉर गवर्नेंस का आभार। आज हम भी आप सब की तरह आज के मुख्य वक्ता देश के माननीय विदेश मंत्री श्री जयशंकर जी को सुनने के लिए उत्सुक हैं। माननीय जयशंकर जी बहुआयामी व्यक्तित्व के धनी हैं, एक सफल प्रभावी राजनयिक से राजनेता बने, एक सफल वार्ताकार, बेहतरीन वक्ता, देश की विदेश नीति से दुनिया में देश के स्वाभिमान, आत्मविश्वास व संकल्प से भारत की नई छवि रखने वाले एक लेखक और संसद में गरिमा से अपनी बात रखने वाले जयशंकर जी हमेशा अपनी बातों से हमारे दिल में जगह रखते हैं। प्रधानमंत्री जी के मार्गदर्शन में उन्होंने प्रमुख वैश्विक शक्तियों के साथ भारत के संबंधों को मजबूत और गहरा करने के लिए सफलतापूर्वक काम किया। उन्हें चीफ एग्जीक्यूटिव ऑफ इंडिया असर्टिव फॉरेन पॉलिसी के रूप में भी जाना जाता है। माननीय जयशंकर जी, ऐसे समय में जबकि दुनिया बड़ी गंभीर चुनौतियों से निकल रही है, हमारी विदेश नीति को स्किलफुली नेविगेट करने और दुनिया में भारत का मान बढ़ाने में महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका निभा रहे हैं। आज हम ऐसे समय में जी रहे हैं जब जीवन के विभिन्न क्षेत्रों में अभूतपूर्व गति से परिवर्तन हो रहे हैं। कुछ वर्षों पहले रे कुर्जवेल, स्टीफन हॉकिंग, फ्रांसिस किरण क्रॉस जैसे प्रसिद्ध फ्यूचरोलॉजिस्ट और वैज्ञानिकों को हम सब ने पढ़ा तो उन्होंने जो भविष्य के बारे में भविष्यवाणी की थी, लगता था वो सारी चीजें साकार नहीं होने वाली। लेकिन जो उनका अनुमान था कि भविष्य में तकनीकी परिवर्तन इतने तेज और गहरे होंगे कि दिस में रैप्चर द फैब्रिक ऑफ ह्यूमन सिविलाइजेशन। विशेषज्ञ आज चेतावनी देते हैं कि आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस, मशीन लर्निंग और ऐसी अन्य तकनीकें डबल एजेड वीपन्स के रूप में हैं। ऐसे समय में जब चीजें इतनी तेजी से बदल रही हैं, इफेक्टिव गवर्नेंस के आयामों को भी समय के साथ विकसित और समायोजित करने की जरूरत है, ताकि यह सुनिश्चित हो सके कि परिवर्तन समाज को लाभान्वित करे और जो चैलेंजेस हैं उनसे हम लाभ ले सकें। मुझे कुछ एक वर्षों से आईसी सेंटर को जानने का अवसर है। यह देखकर प्रसन्नता है कि इनका विजन स्वच्छ और प्रभावी गवर्नेंस को प्रैक्टिस देना आज से नहीं दशकों से जो परिवर्तन आज दुनिया देख रही है, जो टेक्नोलॉजी ड्रिवन डेवलपमेंट के संदर्भ में बहुत ही रेलिवेंट है। इट ऑफर्स कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग, आईसी सेंटर फॉर गवर्नेंस, it offers capacity building program for improving service delivery and citizen engagement, for promoting inclusive and sustainable development, and emphasizes on the importance of ethical governance. इन योगदानों के माध्यम से आईसी सेंटर फॉर गवर्नेंस अधिक प्रभावी, पारदर्शी और जवाबदेह शासन परिदृश्य बनाने में काफी वर्षों से मदद कर रहा। मुझे ऐसे प्रतिष्ठित संगठन से कुछ वर्षों से जुड़ने का अवसर मिला, इसका श्रेय आदरणीय प्रभात कुमार जी को है। मैं इस रूप में फॉर्चुनेट हूं कि उनका सानिध्य मुझे मिला। उनके लंबे प्रशासनिक अनुभव और उल्लेखनीय योगदान के अलावा उनके सौम्य व्यक्तित्व ने हमें प्रभावित किया। झारखंड जैसे नए राज्य के वह पहले राज्यपाल बने। हमें याद है एक रोबस्ट एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव फ्रेमवर्क की नींव उनके मार्गदर्शन में रखी गई, जिसके कोर एलिमेंट्स थे इंक्लूसिविटी और सोशल जस्टिस। हमें यह भी याद है उनकी प्रेरणा मार्गदर्शन से वहां के विश्वविद्यालयों ने परीक्षा में टॉपर्स की कॉपियों को सार्वजनिक करने का निर्णय लिया और इससे अनेक कदम उठे, जिसका इनोवेटिव एफर्ट्स का बड़ा अच्छा असर रहा। मैं आईसी सेंटर ऑफ गवर्नेंस के संस्थापकों को धन्यवाद देना चाहता हूं कि हर साल उन्होंने उस व्यक्ति की याद में जिस व्यक्ति के सौजन्य से भारत को एक होने में सबसे अधिक मदद मिली, उनके नाम पर वार्षिक व्याख्यानमाला वो आयोजित करते हैं और ये इसकी प्रतीक्षा रहती है, देश के जाने माने लोगों को बुलाना और सरदार पटेल को याद करना। यह पहल सरदार पटेल के विजन, निर्णय क्षमता, व्यक्तित्व, त्याग और ईमानदारी को हमारे दिलों में हमेशा जिंदा रखेगी। उनके प्रिंसिपल्स ऑफ गवर्नेंस हमेशा इस क्षेत्र से जुड़े लोगों को और आम लोगों को प्रेरित करेंगे। दुर्भाग्यवश हम उनके कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशंस को उचित सम्मान देने में असमर्थ रहे और लगभग 4 दशकों बाद 91 में उन्हें भारत रत्न मिला। मैं 2 चीजें और कह के अपनी बात खत्म करूंगा। श्री वी शंकर जो उनके साथ काम करते थे, उन्होंने माई रेमिनिसेंस ऑफ सरदार पटेल में लिखा है। इस व्याख्यानमाला की प्रासंगिकता क्या है, किस व्यक्ति को हम याद कर रहे हैं, उन्होंने लिखा है एक पैरा में, बट लुक एट द ग्रेटनेस ऑफ द मैन। I was with him up to the end. Not once the thought of his self-denying daughter, whom he was leaving in the hands of his countrymen, came to him. Not once he thought of his son, of his grandson to whom he was devoted. Not once he thought of many of his servants who looked up to him, not only as a master, but as a great father of a great family, but always he was thinking about the welfare of his country. A day previous to his death, he was worrying about how many things. He was worrying about whether this country would be able to bear the burden of the quick changes that took place. He was worrying about the economic situation of the country. It was with the worry on his head that the great light was extinguished that morning of 15 December 1952. और आप जानते हैं श्वेत दूत क्रांति के जनक मिस्टर कुरियन ने अपने रेमिनिसेंस मेमोइर्स में लिखा है कि जब सरदार साहब नहीं रहे तो मणिबेन के पास कुछ पैसे पार्टी के पड़े हुए थे। उनका इंस्ट्रक्शन था लास्ट डेथ बेड से कि ये पैसे जाकर पंडित जी को, तत्कालीन प्रधानमंत्री को दें। वो उन्होंने सौंपा। आप ये भी जानते हैं कि सरदार पटेल का अपने पुत्र से रिश्ता, उन्होंने जब अखबार निकालना शुरू किया तो मना किया उन्होंने और फिर हमेशा के लिए खत्म कर लिया था। आप ये भी आपको स्मरण में होगा कि कैसे सरदार पटेल जब एक मामले में जिरह कर रहे थे वकील के रूप में, तो उनकी पत्नी का निधन तार से मिला, पर वो काम करते रहे। उस व्यक्ति को आज हम यहाँ याद करेंगे। वो भी आदरणीय जयशंकर जी उन पर बोलेंगे। मुझे उम्मीद है कि उस बड़े व्यक्ति को जिन्होंने 50 में चेतावनी दी थी कि पड़ोसी देशों से क्या होगा, उनके इस विजन के बारे में भी हमें सुनने को मिलेगा। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। नमस्कार।
May I now request Dr. Jaishankar to kindly come and deliver his address.
Deputy Chairman Rajya Sabha, Dr. Harivansh ji, Shri Prabhat Kumar ji, Shri Mahesh Kapoor ji, Shri Shanti Narayan ji, dear friends. It's a great pleasure to share some thoughts with all of you today on Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel and governance. Indeed, for anyone who has studied his life, good and strong governance is naturally associated with him. Now, if I were to pick two other characteristics, I think nationalist and realist come readily to mind. And this is not just me. It is the popular image of the Sardar that has remained deep in our consciousness even 74 years after he has passed away. Now, much has been written about him, both directly and with reference to the events and personages of that period. There is a widely held perception that the conventional narrative with which we are all familiar has not done adequate justice to him. That is perhaps attributed to the politics of the era, but I don't want to go into it on this occasion. My hope, I would say even expectation, is that with the passage of time and a more balanced and objective debate in our society, the value of Sardar Patel's multiple contributions would be given the recognition that they truly deserve. Allow me today to essentially focus on some of them and highlight their contemporary relevance. I'm sure all of you would agree with me that it's actually no exaggeration to assert that but for Sardar Patel's leadership, the story of the integration of Indian states in the aftermath of the partition would be very different. Decisions pertaining to Hyderabad, to Junagadh, and the Rajputana have all been written about at length. But there are many more that we take for granted because of his efforts. Even today, his secretary, V.P. Menon's account of what happened at that time, I believe is a must read to understand our modern history. And I myself often give that book to young officers who come as trainees because I tell them that it tells you how it really was and how it could have been but for Patel. Equally revealing have been developments in the one state that Sardar Patel was actually not allowed to handle, Jammu and Kashmir. Now we all know how that unfolded. It has taken us much national effort and many sacrifices to rectify those errors subsequently. 8 decades after independence, perhaps the younger generations, and I'm happy to see some of them in the room, the younger generations may not readily appreciate how seriously a third force model was being pushed by the colonial power to ensure a permanent weakening. It was in large measure due to Sardar Patel's legendary firmness and vast negotiating skills that our senior colleagues have spoken about, which ensured that many instruments of accession were signed. But in the handling of Jammu and Kashmir, we created serious problems for ourselves, problems in national integration, in national security, in diplomacy, and in geostrategy. The foundation that Sardar Patel laid since became the strong edifice of a modern and confident India. But there are lessons from his endeavors which are relevant even now. Foremost among them is that our civilizational ethos does not automatically translate into political coherence and national unity. At various points of our history, internal divisions and selfish agendas have done our country great harm. Indeed, these were traits that the world was readily willing to exploit to its advantage. What Sardar Patel was able to do, and do remarkably, in 1947-48 was to evoke an emotion and an awareness among the states and the rulers towards our nationhood. That is how he could actually bring us all together. Sustaining that spirit is the task that he has bequeathed to all of us, and overcoming many challenges, we have today reached the current stage in our national life. But there are still forces and voices, as there have been in the past, that seek to divide and weaken. They speak of narrower identities, they promote conflicting interests, they advocate divided loyalties, to a point where in India, that has existed virtually as long as human history itself, is again envisaged by some people as a negotiation. In a democratic society, I can understand that there will inevitably be debates and discussions, but these should end up as national understandings and national consensus, and not become a counterpoint to our nationalism. For that very reason, we should be continually committed to strengthening the national spirit and nurturing our integration. History has demonstrated the great cost of mainstreaming divisive politics, especially those centered around vote banks. The real tribute that we can pay to Sardar Patel is to never let our guard down. Friends, all polities are run by institutions and through their established practices. The quality of governance is often a key factor in determining comprehensive national power. At the time of independence, there were serious dilemmas that accompanied the political transition. It is to the credit of Sardar Patel that he stood up strongly for the continuity of our governance, whether it was our bureaucratic or military institutions and their practices. This enabled responsible policy making and smooth implementation. Let us appreciate that in the era of decolonization, very few other countries were able to create the kind of systemic stability that we experienced in India. Obviously, a great deal of the credit goes to the national movement, which instilled political awareness deeply among our people. But this venue is particularly appropriate to also recognize how crucial was the role of the bureaucracy in the exercise of nation building after independence. Sardar Patel, more than many of his contemporaries, was a bridge builder between the world of politics and that of civil services. Now, it's not just a question of structures. Contemporary accounts, including many of those who were his political colleagues at that time, reveal how hard Sardar Patel strove to ensure that decisions were not made in silos. And we are all from that world, so we understand that challenge. Probably his unique standing encouraged others to seek his advice and to share their anxieties. Though his portfolios were home, the states, and information and broadcasting, his policy impact actually ranged from defense and external affairs to development and finance. The takeaway here is the importance of integrated decision making and efficient systems of delivery. Today, when much greater emphasis is being put on continuous training and strong performance evaluation, the Sardar certainly serves as a symbol of good governance. Sound policy making requires a proper understanding of the environment in which we operate, and I'm sure none of you would disagree with that proposition. Since no nation is really an island unto itself, this applies as much to foreign policy as it does to domestic one. What makes Sardar Patel stand out was his hard-headed approach to challenges reflected in both strategic clarity and decisive action. He, at least, was never given to viewing problems through rose-tinted glasses, nor being swayed by the fashionable ideologies of the day. This was a man who intuitively gauged the big picture, who worked through all its complications and carefully prepared the ground for the right responses. In the field of national security, for example, he assessed the dangers in Junagadh, in Hyderabad and Kashmir very accurately. And when the time came to act, he had no hesitation in using all the instruments at his command. And because the governance structures at this delicate period of our history saw him as their champion, they too responded to their fullest. In that sense, this period is instructive on how to get the best out of the system and deal with critical issues. Those two are lessons to remember. Of particular relevance in this regard is the handling of Jammu and Kashmir and the decision to refer the Pakistani attack to the United Nations under Article 35 of the UN Charter, which is the article on the threat to international peace and security. Now, there is a debate whether this could have been done better under Article 51 of the Charter as a right of self-defense. But Sardar Patel actually was opposed to going to the United Nations at all. He had resisted this in the case of Junagadh, and he had resisted this in the case of Hyderabad as well. And his logic was a logic of very basic realism, that India should not submit its issues to the judgment and to the interests of other powers. Sadly for all of us and for our nation, his caution was disregarded. And India, lulled by a sense of false internationalism, was set up by the United Kingdom, ably assisted at that time by Belgium, Canada, and the United States. What began as the Jammu and Kashmir question was conveniently changed to the India-Pakistan question, putting the two of them at par with each other, and with all the attendant implications. It took us a quarter century thereafter to settle the matter. Other than the misreading of world politics, there was an equally serious misjudgment of Pakistan by India. Within our system, Patel was the most forceful advocate of using all avenues of pressure on that country after the invasion of Jammu and Kashmir. His reluctance to take the matter to the UN itself stemmed from the belief that Pakistan was it was better to deal directly with Pakistan rather than in a framework that would allow Pakistan to manipulate. His own approach in regard to refugee handling and rehabilitation issues in the country also said much about his attitude to nationalist forces. Sardar Patel recognized that those who truly responded to the crisis should be supported without allowing politics to color his assessment. Today, we may be tempted to speculate what Sardar Patel's approach would have been to Pakistan-related issues that came up in the decade after his passing away. For example, would he have extended his support to the Indus Waters Treaty of 1960? Or dismissed it, like the then Prime Minister, as an issue just about a pail full of water that was negligible in the context of larger international politics, and subscribed to the justification that it was a decisive move towards a settlement and to peace with Pakistan? An understanding of the Sardar's life, policies and actions should allow all of us to come up with our own answers. Like any neighbor, India would certainly like to have good relations with Pakistan. But that cannot happen by overlooking cross-border terrorism and indulging in wishful thinking. As the Sardar demonstrated, realism must be the foundation for policy. India's relationship with China is similarly an issue on which the Sardar Patel's instincts are on record. And they differed considerably from that of Prime Minister Nehru. The most cited example was, of course, their famous exchange of correspondence in 1950 on this matter. In Patel's view, India had done everything to allay China's apprehensions, but that country regarded us with suspicion and skepticism, perhaps mixed with a little hostility. He highlighted that for the first time, India's defense had to concentrate on two fronts simultaneously. His assessment was that China had definite ambitions and aims that shaped its thinking about India in a less than friendly way. Now, what I'm giving you is a near verbatim summary of his famous letter. Pandit Nehru, in contrast, referred to China's protestations of friendship and warned against losing our sense of perspective and giving way to unreasoning fears. To him, it was inconceivable that China would undertake what he called a wild adventure across the Himalayas. He did not, and again these are his words, he did not envisage any real military invasion from China in the foreseeable future. Now, this exchange was part of an internal debate, and it obviously allowed the two leaders to express themselves very frankly, even if it was very undiplomatic. Each one reflected an approach not just to a neighbor, but to issues of national security and to world politics as well. Patel passed away soon after this exchange and must have surely felt vindicated by the events in the decade that followed. The point about the recollection is to stress the importance of getting the right assessment of the relevant situation. This is a key aspect of governance, because if we start with a misdiagnosis, everything else thereafter only takes us in the wrong direction. The result of the idealist view in this case, for example, shifted India's focus away from preparing our defenses. Instead, we spent our energies making common cause on third-party issues and advocating the claims in the United Nations of the very neighbor with whom we then went on to have a conflict in 1962. Now, governance is equally about undertaking the appropriate level of planning, right level of preparations, and ensuring suitable appointments. I'm talking in civil service institutes, so I think that should be fairly obvious. In 1962, our troops were sent to the Himalayan borders without the right equipment or acclimatization. And that was because there was virtually no planning for that contingency. And to compound matters, those charged with responsibilities from Defense Minister Krishna Menon downwards were visibly ill-equipped to deal with them. Now, this is not hindsight, because many questions were raised and, in fact, controversies erupted even ahead of the 1962 war. Today, the same challenge is being met, but it is being met with more painstaking and focused efforts in parallel with our diplomatic engagement. That our border infrastructure spending has gone up 5 times in the last decade is but one reflection of our seriousness. So too is the fact that we have such a tight pole mill approach, which ensures that our system moves fully in lockstep. Indeed, even other facets of the relationship are coordinated in a manner that our national security interests are better served. Sardar Patel would surely appreciate that the integrated decision making, which used to center in his time around his personality, is now increasingly built into our system. During the end of Sardar's life, India and China were both re-emerging in the global order as modern nation states. The complexities of the relationship was just beginning to be visible. Much has happened in the decades that have passed. Today, our ties are again at crossroads. The present situation does not serve the interests of either nation. There is a way forward, and that is by reinstating peace and tranquility in the border areas, respecting the LAC, and not seeking to change the status quo. Beyond that, the three mutuals, that is mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and mutual interests, offer a credible pathway. After all, the rise of Asia can only happen when India and China have a positive dynamic. Another issue that has confronted our nation from the Sardar's time till now is the nature of the relationship that we should have with the West. This is with particular reference to the United States and to some extent, perhaps more in the earlier days with the United Kingdom. Now, even by 1950, the duality of these relationships had become apparent. On the one hand, Western nations were our major development partners and they were our main interlocutors on the international stage. At the same time, on matters related to our national integration and our national security, most of all on Jammu and Kashmir, their role was mischievous, if not worse. All Indian leaders have sought to strike a balance, and the Sardar was no exception. How to get it right has been the perennial challenge. Sardar Patel's view was typically optimal. It was very grounded. In some of my own writings, I have referred to him as the pioneer of the India First approach. He recognized the realities of the global power structure and felt that they should be handled appropriately to gain full advantage. In particular, he appreciated the salience of the United States to the world order and believed in, we are talking 1946, 1950, and he believed that it would be difficult for India to industrialize significantly without American cooperation. As a nationalist, he had absolutely no problem standing up to the West on Jammu and Kashmir. But as a realist, he saw little point in crossing them on matters not central to Indian interests. At that time, India's vigorous advocacy of China's permanent membership of the UN was actually a major irritant with the West. Many of the less ideological members of the cabinet also believed that this campaign was misplaced. They included Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee, amongst others. Now, in one of his last public appearances, Sardar Patel declared that many people, and we all know what that means, many people believed that India should not take American help because it would lose prestige and be perceived as joining a bloc. He, on the contrary, felt that India was quite capable of realizing and protecting its own interests and positions. So this was both a debate, in a way you can say, about our national assuredness as well as on global strategy. Allowing others a veto on our positions and not exercising choices because we fear their displeasure or what will they say if we do this. This is being neither independent nor being smart. Unfortunately, those ideological strands, the outlook that Sardar Patel was contesting in 1950, it still continues to this day. We saw that when it came to assessing the merits of the Quad mechanism in the Indo-Pacific. The difference between backing out in 2007 and standing firm in 2017 was one of clarity and of confidence. In the last decade, whenever we have returned to the approach of Sardar Patel, it has undoubtedly served us very well. While we largely associate the Sardar with the challenge of integration and with the promotion of our administration capabilities, some thought also needs to be given to his economic outlook. He had very strong faith in Indian entrepreneurship, and he actually envisaged unleashing our economic energies as key to rebuilding India. In that regard, he visualized partnerships abroad that would enhance productivity and upgrade technology at home. How comfortable he would have been with the socialist policies that followed his demise is something that we can only contemplate, though I think we can do that with some degree of confidence. That this eventually led us to the crisis of 1991 is of course an undeniable fact. It is strange that some seek to advocate again the very policies which brought the nation to that point. But the fact is, the government today is doing the reforms we should rather than the reforms, rather than just the reforms we must. And that is a phenomenon that would surely meet with the Sardar's approval. Let me also say a word about vote bank politics, since it is so prevalent in our times. Sardar Patel was among those of his generation who were troubled by our unwillingness then to take forward our ties with Israel for that very reason. Like so many things in India, that too has fortunately changed. Sardar Patel was dealing with the enormous challenge of reconstructing India after 2 centuries of colonialism. But we must not forget that he was doing so at a time when the international order was being reshaped after the Second World War, and as decolonization had just begun. Reading the big picture right and making our calculations is not easy. Today, the world is again in the midst of a great churn. That order that had just emerged in Patel's times has now run its course. We are seeing the emergence of multipolarity and the return to the natural diversity of the world. There is no model, there is no textbook that is going to guide us in this regard. What we need is the right combination of self-belief, of realism, of preparation, of nationalism, the very qualities of Sardar Patel that I spoke about. We need them to prepare for Viksit Bharat. Sardar Patel will always be an inspiration in that endeavor. I thank you for your attention.
In the next 10 minutes that we have, the minister has agreed to answer any questions that may be there in the audience. Anybody who has any questions, will please introduce yourself and be short, specific to the question, and not make a statement, so that more people can have an opportunity to question. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Surabhi. Since you said governance is about planning, and you are planning to go to Pakistan for the SCO, what are the kind of, and given the love-hate relationship that Pakistani media and the government has with you personally, what are the kind of questions and challenges and blaming, etc., are you anticipating and planning for? Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Dr. Mukta. I actually have 2 questions for you, sir. Okay. Sir, when it comes to women-led governance, As per your vast experience, sir, what are some of the key aspects or practices that we can adopt from other countries perhaps that are doing better than us in this regard? Thank you, sir.
One more.
I have two brief questions. One to ubiquitous, indefatigable EAM, and the other as an erudite member of the cabinet. To EAM, I only refer about what you have been calling integration, one of the most difficult tasks that Sardar Patel accomplished. Mr. Minister, I just want to ask that we in SARC+1, for instance, 9 countries in close neighborhood, with India accounting for almost 80% of GDP of all the SARC+1, I mean the SARC plus Myanmar. How is it that most of them seem to be reluctant to accept India as the real, natural, historical pivot for the region? And two, as member of the cabinet, some aspects which seem to be repugnant to even some of us, and also to some of the US legislators, for instance, the Rampals and others who seem to have special affinity for you, that the image of India is riled. I mean, in terms of the fringe elements being allowed to sully the image of the government. Now, as a member of the cabinet, whether you have ever felt the necessity to see whether something more positive can be done to get rid of this particular image. Thank you.
Let me start with the first question. Yes, I am scheduled to go to Pakistan in the middle of this month, and that is for a meeting of the SCO heads of government. Normally, Prime Minister goes to the higher level meeting, the heads of state, and one of us, it changes, usually one of the ministers goes for the heads of government meeting. So that's in line with the tradition. It so happens that the meeting is taking place in Pakistan because, like us, they are a relatively recent member. So your question, I think, as I understood it, was, am I planning for it? Of course I'm planning for it. I mean, in my business, you plan for everything which you're going to do and for a lot of things which you're not going to do and which could happen also. I mean, you plan for that as well. I expect there would be a lot of media interest because the very nature of the relationship is such, and I think we'll deal with it. But I do want to say it will be for a multilateral event. I mean, I'm not going there to discuss India-Pakistan relations. I'm going there to be a good member of the SCO, but since I'm a courteous and civil person, I will behave myself accordingly. So, on the women-led governance, look, I think we also have our own experiences, and so do other societies. When I look, a lot of people in the room, their career has been dealing with administration, with development, with society very deeply. Mine was mostly dealing with foreign policy, but in the last 5 years, 5.5 years as a member of parliament, obviously I see very much more of you can say, in a way, the grassroots. And my own sense is that when there are a lot of things we can learn. There are a lot of things where we ourselves are an example. And certainly in the case of women-led development, in fact, in the G20, we were the people who really pushed this idea that, this is not just about closing gender gaps, because that's almost like women will continuously stay behind and you're going to play catch up, and that's where it ends. I mean, there are many areas where, I mean, after all, in many ways, they are a natural pivot of families, and there are areas where their contribution and their role is very different, and it's not something which is replaceable by men. So I do think it's a very active subject to engage the world. But other than that, part of what I would say we are trying to do in foreign policy is foreign policy. Many countries have used foreign policy in a very focused manner to get the best things out of the world. I mean, it could be investment, it could be trade, it could be technology, but a lot of it is about best practices. How does some other country do this better or different, or in some manner is there something we can learn? And I think that's an attitude I would say we should encourage, and certainly through foreign policy we are trying to do that. On the integration issue, at the moment, SAARC is not moving forward. We have not had a meeting of SAARC for a very simple reason, that there is one member of SAARC who is practicing cross-border terrorism, at least against one more member of SAARC, maybe more. Now, when if you're all sitting together and cooperating, and at the same time, this kind of terrorism goes on so openly, it actually poses a challenge for us. That do you ignore it and go ahead, and in which case you are normalizing it, you are accepting that this is a legitimate tool of statecraft. And I think at some point we came to the decision that we should not do this. That terrorism is something which is unacceptable, and if despite a global view of it, if one of our neighbors continues to do it, then there must be a cost to them. It cannot be business as usual in the SAARC. And that is the reason why actually SAARC meetings have not happened in recent years. But I want to make an equally important point. Because SAARC has not happened doesn't mean regional activities have stopped. In fact, I would argue that the last 5 or 6 years, we have seen far more regional integration in the Indian subcontinent than we have seen since the partition of India. That if you look today with Bangladesh, with Nepal, with Bhutan, with Myanmar, with Sri Lanka, where I came, you have railway lines being restored, you have roads being rebuilt, you have electricity grids being built, countries export and import power, you have fuel lines. Our refineries today give fuel to Nepal and to Bangladesh. You have ferries, you have, fertilizer supplies. So, and if you look, medical visas, the way our hospitals are linked. So I actually would say that what is happening in the neighborhood, and it's happening because we are espousing this policy called neighborhood first. Neighborhood first means we are the biggest country. We must put in the maximum resources. We should not look to say, are they doing something equal to us? Because they are smaller. They will not be in a position to necessarily reciprocate. So we need to take that as our primary responsibility and push that. I didn't entirely understand the second part of your question, but if I got it right, you are saying that sometimes people say things which are awkward. And how do you deal with that? That's how I understood it. So if I understood it right, I mean, in democratic politics or, in politics, many things are said. I mean, in diplomacy, all things are handled.
मैं दीपक सिंघल हूँ साहब, मैं उत्तर प्रदेश में चीफ सेक्रेटरी था प्रभात कौर साहब का बहुत जूनियर कुलीग हूँ। मैं सिर्फ एक विषय आपके संज्ञान के लिए रखना चाहता था कि हम लोग पिछले 1.5 वर्ष से एक नया अध्याय जीवन का 50 प्रोफेसर्स, वाइस चांसलर्स और दुनिया के 60 देशों की यात्रा करके भारतीय संस्कृति के माध्यम से दुनिया का समस्याओं का समाधान, इस पे काफ़ी डॉक्यूमेंटेशन किया है। मेरा जो अपना अनुभव रहा, क्योंकि हमारे सब कुलीग्स ही हैं, एम्बेसी में भी, फॉरेन सेक्रेटरीज भी रहे हैं, कि हमारे जो कन्फ्यूशियस सेंटर चाइना ने खोले हैं, इस तरह के अगर एक इंस्टीट्यूशनल पोजीशन, सिंस यू आर एन MEA टुडे सर, दैट इफ यू हैव इंस्टीट्यूशनल अरेंजमेंट्स with embassies emerging as a parallel Confucius centers of not Confucius exactly, but हमारी ज्ञान परंपरा और ध्यान परंपरा को जितनी परंपरा है। मैं एक छोटा सा लास्ट एग्जांपल दे खत्म करूं। मैं ओडिंगा रेला साहब मिला जब केनिया में, उनकी डॉटर को आईसाइट कंप्लीट ब्लाइंड थी और केरला में आके ठीक हो गई, दुनिया ठीक नहीं कर पाई। PM साहब बुलाते भी हैं। तो इन सब चीज़ों को एग्जाम्पल लेके अगर ये हमारी फॉरेन सर्विस का रीओरिएंटेशन एक बार सभी लोग जो उन्होंने इकट्ठा किया सामान, उसके मीटिंग होके उनके सामने रखा जा सके, शायद देश के लिए भला होगा। ये चीज़ आपके सामने सुझाव के लिए रखना चाहता हूँ।
Sir, I am Shivam, research scholar at University of Delhi. Sir, my question is based on historical perspective. Sir, is there any real or big difference between Atal Bihari Vajpayee's good governance and Sardar Patel's good governance on Kashmir's issue? Like we can see fraternity, integration in both leader, or something different perspective we can gather it. Thank you, sir.
Sir, this side. Sir, my question is regarding UN, the way Israel, Gaza, and things are in bad shape about international affair, and some people propose that it's a failure of UN, and there are some chances of proposal to be for India to be a member of Permanent Security Council, and some people, academic, have proposed that UK should seat its membership in favor of India, and second option is there should be 7 members with veto power, or next 7 members without veto power. The third is as regular 7 members to be regularly elected for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. So why not to be assertive about this UN Security
मैं
Council
आपको
member?
जवाब दूंगा।
Thank you, sir.
I'll take one last question.
So my
Last question from the lady there.
so my name is Soumya Sood. So here.
Hello.
So my name is Soumya Sood. I'm closely working in international relations. Given the history of modern war, we have seen that countries that remain on a neutral stand benefit the most out of war situations. So the situation that is currently proceeding in the Middle Eastern countries, what do you think the opportunities and threats could arrive to India?
Okay.
Hello. Sir, I want your views on setting up of a efficiency commission to improve our governance. Is it possible or being considered by you?
Okay. I will end finally since.
I'm very short. I don't know whether it's really appropriate, but I think in today's time it is, given the fact that it's the Sardar Patel lecture. I'm Sabina Indajit. We've all read a lot about Sardar Patel. In his nationalism, would you consider that he would have envisaged a Hindu Rashtra?
लेट मी स्टार्ट। आपका जो पहला सवाल जो था, देखिए हमारे यहाँ आजकल हर राजदूतावास में, हर उच्चायुक्त में एक कल्चरल सेंटर है। ये पिछले दशक में ये परिवर्तन आया है, और हर जगह जो है हमारे यहाँ से प्रयास तो ज़रूर होता है कि कम से कम योगा का टीचिंग, जो अगर कोई भाषा है, हिंदी, संस्कृत, तमिल, जो भी है, और जो हमारे नृत्य जो हैं, डांस वगैरह जो हैं, इनकी टीचिंग हो। अब इसके अलावा कुछ सेंटर्स हैं जहाँ या तो हमारी समुदाय बड़ी है या वहाँ भारत के बारे में रुचि इतनी ज़्यादा है कि हमने छोटे सेंटर को और बड़ा बनाया है। जैसे अब ये नॉर्मली कुछ रूस जैसे जगह या यूके है या कुछ और हैं ऐसे। अब इसमें जो नया इनिशिएटिव जो आया है, जो प्रधानमंत्री ने हम लोगों को ये निर्देश दिया है कि हम तिरुवल्लुवर सेंटर्स जो हैं दुनिया में स्थापित करें। तो मुझे लगता है कि पहला सेंटर कुछ ही दिनों में कहीं एक देश में हम जरूर इसको स्थापित करेंगे। तो जो आप कह रहे हैं मैं जरूर मानता हूं कि आजकल दुनिया में भारत के बारे में जिज्ञासा ज़्यादा है और इंटरनेशनल डे योग दिवस के बाद जो है लोगों के मन में है कि भारत में कुछ ऐसी, जैसे आपने कहा कि कुछ ज्ञान है, कुछ ध्यान है, कि कुछ सीखने को है, तो ये है जरूर, और हम जरूर इसको हम मानते भी हैं। अब इसको हम कैसे अपनी ओर से इसको कैसे आगे बढ़ाएं, ये जरूर हमारे मन में है। और मुझे लगता है जो ICCR जो हमारे लिए एक किस्म से व्यवस्था है ये करने के लिए, ये ICCR एक अपने आप को एक किस्म से मॉडर्नाइज कर रही है इस चुनौती को आगे ले जाने के लिए। जो दूसरा सवाल जो है आपका, जो योर क्वेश्चन ऑन गुड गवर्नेंस, people live in different times, you know. During Sardar Patel's time, we had just come out of the partition. The country was really traumatized, because when partition happened, nobody really saw what it would mean on the ground, the bloodshed that happened, and the disruption that happened. Now, if you look at Atalji's time, what had happened at that time was that the original socialist model had created a crisis in 1991. We were rebuilding after that. Many decisions had been put up. So I would say Atalji in many ways would be particularly remembered because, one, he took the long delayed decision on nuclear, exercising the nuclear option. But what people appreciate less, he was a big economic reformer, that if you look at the economic numbers of that period, they're really very, very impressive numbers. So there would be comparisons, there would be changes during, even in Jammu and Kashmir, which was your particular focus, the situation in 1950, situation in 1998, 99, and situation today in 2024 is very different. So my sense is, every Prime Minister tries to improve governance. After all, that is part of the responsibility you have. Some have a greater focus, a greater, I would say, grip, a stronger sense. I mean, if you look at the present Prime Minister, the kind of emphasis which he puts on training, and the kind of feedback mechanisms that we have, the degree of rigor, as someone who started many years ago, I mean, the Prime Minister when I started my career was Morarji Desai. So when I look from there to today, honestly, the rigor and the workload and the expectation of people in government has gone up. And I think in many ways the kind of delivery expectation in society, people are not willing to wait the way they would have waited 10 or 20 years ago. Society has become impatient in this country, and rightly so in many respects. Your question, जो आपका जो था UN के बारे में, look, we are not waiting for the failure of UN to reform UN. The UN needs to be reformed because it is 80 years old. And when UN was formed, there were 51 members, and all 51 were not free. We were one of the founding members. Today there are 193 members. So imagine if something has changed from 51 to 193. How can the management remain the same? It doesn't make any sense. So, and if you look at the major, the economic hierarchy, that has also changed. So, people will come up with this idea that inko nikalo, inko dalo. See, nobody will willingly yield their position. That's the reality. But there is a negotiation going on called the Intergovernmental Negotiation, IGN process. The pressures within the UN. We just had a summit of the future. So in the summit of the future, there was a much greater sense that, look, we have to do something today about changing the UN. So I think the pressures will go, and at some stage it will grow to a point where it will be impossible for the people who are currently trying to stop it from continually stopping it. The question you had on opportunities in the Middle East. See, the Middle East is not opportunity. Middle East is a cause of great concern, deep worry. The conflict is widening. What we saw as a terrorist attack, then the response, then we saw what happened in Gaza, now you're seeing it in, Lebanon, exchange of between Israel and Iran, the Houthis firing on the Red Sea. This is actually costing us. It's not that somebody is neutral and you benefit. Shipping rates have gone up, insurance rates have gone up, export, foreign trade is being affected. Oil prices have gone up. Day before yesterday, the markets tanked after the Iranian missile attack. So, conflicts can be opportunistically used, I don't deny that. But I think in a globalized world which is so tight, conflict anywhere actually creates problems everywhere. And, some supply of some kind will get affected by this. So I would say, honestly today, whether it is the conflict in Ukraine or the conflict in the Middle East, West Asia, these are big factors of instability, big factors of concern. I think the entire world, including us, we are worried about it, and we are trying to see at least where we can make a difference and do what we can. On the efficiency side, in this government, actually, there is, in a sense, a commission which has looked at making bureaucracy more competitive, making it more sharp in a way. There is something called Mission Karm Yogi. The whole idea is that it should not, the bureaucracy should not be a escalator. That, there should be training, there should be performance evaluation, there should be a kind of a right fit for the right job. I think all of that is happening, and I would say, having spent most of my working life in the bureaucracy, I can see today, and I mean, in our case, the service which I was a member of, it's in a sense a one service ministry. So you have the opportunity of coming back to it again and again and looking at people in the same environment. I can see changes, very frankly, for the better. I think people are far more competitive and, in a sense, far more willing to do things. And to me, that's a source of great encouragement. So the last question, it's a very interesting question, because in the late 40s and early 50s, there were big issues, and some of them pertain to Sardar Patel, some of them, to people like Rajendra Prasad. Issues like, for example, RSS did sterling work during the partition. Now, there were people who, for political reasons, didn't want to recognize it. Now, I think Sardar Patel was a very culturally, I mean, he had, from what I understand, I mean, I've not just read the official side of it, I've also read the associated personal accounts of people who worked with him. My own grandparents were in the government at that time. I've sort of had talked to him. I think at that time, a lot of people felt that, look, it's one thing to respect, all religions should be respected. But respect for religions does not mean that your own religion needed to be suppressed or played down. And that, unfortunately, because of the ideologies of the day, was the direction in which it went. And I think he would have been very uncomfortable with the fact that somewhere people were almost defensive about being a Hindu. My guess is it would have troubled him. And, if you look thereafter at issues like the, inaugurating the Somnath temple, which became a major political issue at that time. So it's hypothetical, but I would say, here was a person with beliefs, faiths, culture, tradition, who was very comfortable in his own skin.
Before I request Mr. Shanti Narayan to propose the vote of thanks, may I request Mr. Prabhat Kumar to give mementos to Dr. Jaishankar and to Dr. Harivansh.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Civil Services Officers Institute and the IC Center for Governance, I have great pleasure in proposing a vote of thanks. We are deeply obliged to Dr. Jaishankar for accepting our invitation to deliver this 5th Sardar Patel Governance Lecture. Sir, we are honored for your sharing with us a whole range of perspectives on the geopolitical scenario in which India is positioned today. Your emphasis on our neighboring countries was particularly enlightening. It has been, sir, an extremely insightful presentation on the evolution of public policy in this vital area of governance. We are also very grateful to you, sir, Shri Harivanshji, Honorable Deputy Chairman of Rajya Sabha, for agreeing to preside over this important event of the IC Center. Our grateful thanks are due to this august audience who have joined us to make this program a success. A special thank you to ladies and gentlemen from the media who have found time to cover our event. Thank you very much.